Hi everybody, Bobby Ogilvy, Project Manager and Professional Coach. So today's question, what are the best psychometrics to use or the best assessments to use? Psychometric assessments. Okay, so I guess first off, different assessments are designed to do different things, so you should think about what you want to get out of it. And the other thing is to say, and you know what, as a guy with a good psych background, I'm kind of a stickler for this. You want to think about how good quality the psychometrics you're using are. How well built are they? How much evidence about their validity, their reliability, and then this is kind of a business aspect that I would still pigeonhole the second part of what is their price like. All right, so we'll go through all these different psychometrics for different purposes, right? Probably the most common one everyone has heard of is MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's cute as a guy who's a bit of a youngie myself. Like there's something appealing to it, but really as a psychometric, it doesn't have a lot of crunch. I think the best value they've ever got out of it is that if you look at the 16 types, because it's like a 2 to the 4th, so it's like this big grid of all these options, right? There is that you can correlate certain of the 16 types to certain other outcomes, but really it means it's less about the actual mechanisms, the 4 variables they're looking at, and more about this other correlational thing they're doing, right? So everyone knows it, and the reason I say that is because MBTI is a great example of everyone knows it, but most people don't know that the science behind it is really bad, right? And so it's a good in to say, it's cute, but there's a lot more, right? So some of the different tools we at Talent Edge use are things like, there are ones that deal with character strengths. One thing I really like about some of those ones, particularly the VIA strength one, is that it's in very simple, easy to understand, clear language, right? Everyday language, right? So it's saying, oh yeah, well, you're really good at creativity or forgiveness, or you seem to be big on teamwork, or you like whatever, right? And because it's ranking them, you're saying these are quite high, so you value these, and naturally use these a lot. These are quite low, so it's just the opposite. But it's very simple language, and that would be, maybe maybe you could see how more advanced tests that might give you a dimensional rating of a bunch of variables on an axis might be a bit more dense for the average person. It would take more time and effort to unpack. So, why would we use something like a strengths inventory? Because it gets people starting to think about their self-awareness and also kind of what their, as the name implies, what their strengths are, right? There's also reasons why there's certain inventories that we look at, certain assessments we look at from a team perspective, right? There's certain operational team outcomes we're looking for, right? So for us, that's another thing we're looking at. What assessments are going to help us get that team slice of things? There are other ones we use which deal more with personality in relation to stress reactions, and another one that deals with stages of development, particularly stages of, broadly speaking, they would use a term like integration, but it's part, personal maturity as well as externally. You could frame it as like moral togetherness, right? So again, there are particular leadership development situations where you'd want to know that data, right? So this is and the reason why it's important to think about what you want to get out of your assessment is that once you dig into it, you realize there's tons of assessments at tons of different price points, including some of them free. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to find the wrong tool, or really just be kind of swept up in the first professional looking thing. And really, if all you want is just a professional looking tool or a nice color coded system, there are lots that do that, and they're I don't want to say they're all junk, but they're varying types of quality. There was, I don't want to name names, but okay, so there's this type of assessment called DISC. And DISC is not one assessment. DISC is actually a theory, a foundational theory, which a whole bunch of assessments are based off of. Now, I think there is one called Everything DISC and a whole bunch of other DISC variation type assessments, right? But it's dealing with what? Dominance and influence and whatever the other ones are, right? And there was then out of the UK, I found this one, I don't want to say the name of it, which seemed quite compelling. I wanted to call itself New and Neuroscience and Neuroleadership. And then I looked at it and realized this is just DISC reskinned with a different color system, but it was still essentially dealt with 4 axes, had a slightly different way of graphing it, but the content was the same, and you want to kind of have that rigor, or else you'll get into this thing where, oh, this is going to magically solve all my problems, or even like the price point doesn't really justify how much you get out of it, right? So I mean, in that way, like, sorry, my apologies, I'm losing my train of thought here. Psychometrics are only as good as not just how well made they are, how predictive and actually useful that data is, but how much they can, given what your results are, how much that can direct some kind of development, learning, training effort. It's not common, but you could see it would be very easy if all you just want is just raw data to just do assessment after assessment. But if you think of that as part of, whether it's part of a coaching relationship or some other kind of therapy or kind of development training effort, right? Just throwing data at someone, even if it's supposedly data about themselves, right? Here are your strengths, and here are your, your stress patterns, and here's your stage of it. Until one, you can fully understand that, but particularly until you know what to do with that, till you know how to enact or change your processes or bring more awareness to something, so what, right? It just becomes another stream of data. At its worst, I mean, we know that certain types of personality disorders are less effective to be treated in psychotherapy. And so, I mean, if what you're dealing with are aspects of narcissism or other kind of personality disorders in that end of things, right? You could see how just providing, let's call it like a narcissist CEO, more data about themselves, even if it's to reveal their gaps, that might push things in the wrong direction. And if what you actually want is for them to be practicing and not just experiencing themselves, but have others experience them in a different way, that requires different work. I guess this is the point where you're saying, psychometrics assessment, psychometric data is good, but it needs to be part of a system, a development, some coaching program, which is part of actually creating change, right? So in that way, I don't want anyone to think that, like, oh, I'll just do this assessment and I'll get all this, everything will be way different. No, it's as different as you make it. It's as applied, it's as practical as you make it, right? Now, that being said, too, there are lots of great assessments, and assessments can also be improved over time. So it's not to say that, ones that might not have, been moderately strong in the past can't get better, or to say that things can't get outdated. If you think of, with our modern data analytics, we can do a ton, and so a lot of assessments were made in this previous, let's call it 20 to 40 year band. Let's call it late 70s up to about 1990, something like that, right? And unless they've continued to update and enhance it, or find other ways to validate it and enhance the level of analyses and reports you can get out of it, they may be somewhat defunct, particularly if you're dealing with things around career strengths, right? Which is to say, think of how different our careers are now. What is it, 2017, as opposed to 1977, right? So you really kind of want to be skeptical of some of these. In that way, I personally feel that a lot of these are coming from a very old, outdated, perhaps executive search kind of business model, right? Where they want to deal with it's a kind of low volume, high margin business model, right? They want to charge a whole lot for these assessments because they assume because they assume they're the best thing on the market, which is no longer the case. Their competitive advantage is not as strong as it once was. But two, they think they're going to do so much for these few individual amazing leaders you're trying to develop or trying to search for. And more as talent and performance management is just a normal part of good organizations, good leadership, good HR. You can't just be doing this for the few in your organization. You need to be dealing with a whole bunch of people, with hopefully everyone in your organization, right? Learning and development is really just the name of the game. Really, that means we're kind of moving to a culture of just-in-time learning, and less of this big monolithic, someone has established expert knowledge which will be valid for long, huge periods of time, and it's more, does someone have the skills they need right now to execute what they need to execute? Anyway, back to the original premise of this. Psychometrics, why are they useful? How should you go about choosing one? Okay, so one, you should be thinking about what you're going to be using it for. What data do I want to get out of it? And then as much as possible, really dig into what others are saying about it and the research basis for this. One use case that I want to say is that, and for one, I would say that has redeemed itself in recent years, is that, okay, so some of you may have been familiar with a personality system called the Enneagram, right? And it's an older, almost folksy kind of thing, right? And in the past, no, it wouldn't have been evidence-based. So the notion of 9 types is fine, but whatever questionnaires or assessments they used in the past, or whatever informal systems, were not effective, right? Then there was a questionnaire made in the past decade or two called RETI 2.5. I think that's RHETI 2.5, which it's trying to deal with Enneagram personality outputs. But it wants to do it on a dimensional scale, so it's not just you're this or that. It's you're this many points this, you're that many points that. And it basically went through all the questions it's asking you, did a bunch of other kind of validity work to make sure that it was doing what it was supposed to be doing, right? And it's kind of redeemed itself. Whereas there's a whole host of other premium assessments that are really not so premium at this point. They may have been premium in 1990, 1995, but at this point, there's a lot better ways to do that. And then, so that means modern, chief HR officers, chief learning officers, chief coaching officers, chief cultural officers, they need to know this stuff because they're the people dealing with talent performance management. All right, I'm Bobby Ogilvy. Hopefully you guys learned something about psychometrics and how to make sure you guys are getting your own needs met here in terms of picking and using good psychometric tools. I'll talk to you guys again soon.